Hi all, it's Ellen again with Catholics Against Militarism, and this is episode 123. I am currently reading Walking with a Bible and a Gun by E. Michael Jones. There's a class starting on this September 9th if you'd like to take a class with E. Michael Jones himself and yours truly. Go ahead and join the class. Apparently Taylor Marshall is writing a book. He's coming out with a book on America as well in September. And just listening to this brief clip that popped up on my YouTube, I'd like to pay attention to what Taylor Marshall and his friends are saying in this 6-minute clip, and then I want to compare it to something that E. Michael Jones is saying. And then I want to make a point about natural law. So let's do this. I'll be back with you in 6 minutes. Just pay attention to this, and then we'll be back with you very briefly.
As I'm listening to you, Taylor, I'm thinking to myself, it's right there. It's right at our fingertips. And then I was thinking about that first reading from Sunday, and I'm just going to read part of it here. Moses said to the people, "If only you would heed the voice of the Lord your God and keep his commandments and statutes that are written in the book of the law." But then he goes on, well, where are we going to find it? We're going to go up in the air and find it in the sky? Or are we going to go across the ocean, and find it there? He says, no. And it goes on, he says, "It is something very near to you, already in your mouths and in your hearts. You have only to carry it out." And this is where I think the MAGA movement is actually, at least one could say you're putting your toe in the water, you're getting toward it, because the expression that we hear a lot nowadays is common sense. And to me, that's in the context of what it's talking about, it's natural law. And that's really what that first reading gets to, It's right there in your heart.
Okay, natural. It's right there in your heart. It's just right there in your heart. Everyone has it. It's just there. Okay, that's the first thing. Now let's keep going.
I actually got the great pleasure to give the first talk at Mar-a-Lago. You were down, all three of us were down there. I said, common sense is the good, the right, the proper, the ethical, the principle, the moral. What is the right thing to do? And then I quoted John Adams right at the beginning of our nation. He said, "We have no government armed with power capable of contending with human passions unbridled by morality and religion. Avarice, ambitions, revenge, gallantry would break the strongest cords of our Constitution as a whale goes through the net. Our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other." And I guess really that's what we're being called to right now. And I can't wait for your book, because it's going to call us back to that common sense, that natural law, right? That doing it God's way, that is really the foundation that keeps our nation together.
All right, I know it's not super fair to be so picky in a clip with Father Hellman. I mean, everyone knows what he's saying is that we've gotten really so far away from, being a Christian country. And at this point, we're being called back to that. That's what he's saying. But he's talking about common sense, natural law, and God's way as if they're all the same thing. And as they say, common sense is not so common. But let's get back to what he's saying.
Father Hyman, you have hit the bullseye. The Declaration of Independence explicitly appeals to natural law and God.
Yep.
All right. So anybody in America who says, "I don't believe in God," or "I don't believe in natural law," get out. The entire basis of who we are as a nation. And by the way, it goes back to scholastic Catholic theology regarding a tyrant. All right. We're dealing with the King in England, who is a tyrant. He qualifies under all of Thomas Aquinas's criteria. We can explain this as Catholics. Our Declaration of Independence refers to God 4 times. It doesn't quote sacred scripture, but there are many references. I show that in the book. And it explicitly appeals to natural law.
Did you guys get that? I just want to make sure. Natural law. You get that?
So if you're talking to AOC or anyone out there and you're like, "Well, natural law says," and she says, "Natural law," it's like, get out of the country, because the Declaration of Independence, it bases our Declaration of Independence from England on natural law.
Hey, you guys, the Declaration of Independence was based on natural law. And if you don't believe so, you and AOC can just get the hell out of here.
So natural law is cooked into the American experiment.
Yep.
The Declaration of Independence is so based on natural law. It's cooked in. cooked in to the whole American experiment, the whole thing. Natural law, y'all. All right, we got that?
It's cooked into who we are. The Constitution, it more than it cites any of the Enlightenment philosophers or references them, the Constitution and the Founding Fathers, which book of the Bible do they cite the most?
The Gospel of John. Gospel of Mark. Luke. Matthew. Has to be Matthew.
Deuteronomy.
Yep.
Deuteronomy is their favorite book. And I talk about this in Christian Patriot. Why is Deuteronomy the most quoted and referenced book by the Founding Fathers? The reason is Deuteronomy is the civil constitution for the people of Israel given by Moses, as you just quoted, Father, which was your reference. You're connecting it with natural law.
Yep, that was Deuteronomy.
Connecting it with natural law.
Yep, that was Deuteronomy.
Yeah, so the Founding Fathers are like,
What they're thinking is, how do we follow Jesus? How do we follow him? That's what they're thinking.
We've declared our independence based on natural law. That's actually in the document of the Declaration of Independence. We now must form a constitution. All right. Well, there's one book of the Bible that's very much about constituting a nation, is Deuteronomy. And so they take those principles from natural law.
Did you get? I think you're getting it, right? You're getting it.
Natural law, and they take the guidelines of the Constitution of Israel, and they write the Constitution. Now, a lot of people will say we're not an explicitly confessional state, we're not explicitly a Christian state, and it's a complicated discussion, but you can see that the air they were breathing, the water they were drinking,
let me guess, was imbued with natural law.
The ink they were writing, all of that was imbued with Christianity, scripture. All the 13 founding colonies, all were confessional states. In the book, I show that almost all of them, including some of them, would say, if you do not confess belief in the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit in the Old and New Testaments, you cannot hold office. Now, they were Protestants. These are Protestant states, except for Maryland. But you see early on that being a Trinitarian, affirming the Bible, is a requirement for holding office. In the Founding Fathers and in the state legislators, up until the 1900s, said if you do not believe in God, you can't hold office. And many of them actually said Christian God, because you can't take the oath of office. And if you can't take the oath of office, you can't hold office. You see their syllogism there, their chain of thinking?
So back then, if we had a leader that, say, refused to put his hand on the Bible when he was taking office, he wouldn't have been able to take office. But now he can. Like when Trump didn't put his hand on the Bible when he was sworn into office, guess things have changed. But wait a minute, didn't Taylor Marshall just say he was down at Mar-a-Lago giving a speech and he's like, Team Trump and everything? What does Taylor Marshall think about Trump not? I guess that was just an accident.
Mm-hmm.
If you're going to take the oath of office, you have to take the oath to God. So this is another thing. If you don't believe in God, you don't believe in natural law, you don't believe in America, you don't believe in the Declaration, you don't believe in the Constitution.
So Constitution, America, Declaration of Independence, natural law, Trinitarianism, Old and New Testament, God, all these things are just kind of wrapped up there, and you gotta like believe in all of it, or you just get out of here. And
you don't believe in the oath. You're useless. You should not be allowed to hold office. This is an American way of thinking that has been lost, and it's a theological way of thinking, and that's why I have to get back to Christian patriotism.
All right, I do have to wonder if Taylor Marshall ever made any comment about the fact that Trump didn't put his hand on the Bible when he was sworn in as president, but I'm sure he would just dismiss that as like momentary, just oversight. Anyway, so this is my thing about natural law, okay? He's so insistent that the American Declaration is founded and imbued with natural law. But when I'm reading E. Michael Jones, and keep in mind, these are both very intelligent, scholarly Catholics, he seems to say it's not founded on natural law. Instead, it's founded on Satanism. Okay, so I don't know. Let me say up front, it could be that I haven't finished reading this book yet and I don't fully understand it and I don't fully understand what EMJ is saying, or it could be that I don't really understand what Taylor Marshall's saying because his book won't come out until September. I haven't had a chance to read it. I'm just saying, let's think for a second about natural law, something that is, quote, common sense and written on our hearts, and it's just God's way. How could these two people who are very intellectual see the Declaration of Independence and the American Revolution in such different terms? I don't know. Again, maybe I misunderstand it. Maybe I'll get EMJ back on to explain to me his views with regard to natural law. But in the introduction of his book, which I already read, but I'll just read again some snippets here, he says that John Milton was the man who wrote the Protestant epic Paradise Lost, and it portrayed Satan as the patron saint of Protestantism. He says that Satan was basically the hero of Paradise Lost. He goes on to say that Protestantism may be the hidden grammar of the American empire, but Satanism is the hidden grammar of Protestantism. Then he goes on to say that Satanism became the hidden grammar of the English Reformation before it could be exported to America. Satanism has been the trajectory of the Anglo-American Empire ever since Satan gave his famous speech at the beginning of Paradise Lost. He goes on to say satanic liberty is another word for slavery. Now, he goes on, in 1776, speaking of common sense, remember at the beginning, the priest in the video said something about natural law is written on our hearts, it's just common sense, and, it's God's way, and it's just so clear, right? Well, in 1776, Thomas Paine quoted Milton in his pamphlet, Common Sense. See how this is coming full circle? The pamphlet he wrote urging the colonies to rebel against the mother country, England. Reconciliation, Paine told the colonists, is now a fallacious dream. Nature hath deserted the connection, and art cannot supply her place. For as Milton wisely expresses, so he's quoting Milton in Common Sense, never can true reconcilement grow where wounds of deadly hate have pierced so deep. End quote. To me, I'll just say, that doesn't sound like a very Christian sentiment, right? Never can true reconcilement grow where wounds of deadly hate have pierced so deep. Whew. In order not to offend the religious sensibilities of his American audience, Paine did not cite the rest of Satan's speech, which concludes by carrying the satanic logic of rebellion to its inevitable conclusion. So I would love to get, in the class that I'm going to take, you should take it with me, with E. Michael Jones, I'm going to ask him, like, well, so you're just, like, against the revolution then? I want to know where he stands on this. But he seems to be saying that it's not founded on natural law and God and God's way at all, that it was founded on a logic of satanic rebellion, which is very different from natural law. And again, how could these two Catholics be so confused about natural law? On January 10th, 1776, Thomas Paine invoked Satan as the presiding spirit of the American Revolution with the publication of his pamphlet, Common Sense. He says, even though all of the signers of that declaration were in full rebellion against the Calvinism which inspired Milton, the signers of the Declaration of Independence expressed the gist, not natural law, but the gist of Satan's speech when they wrote, when a long train of abuses and usurpations pursuing invariably the same object evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for the future security. Unquote. So, Taylor Marshall seems to be saying this is just natural law. This is self-defense against a tyrant. We all know that. We can defend this as Catholics. And E. Michael Jones is saying, no, this is satanic rebellion. I think, again, I'm still working through these books and these ideas, so I might have to get E. Michael Jones on here to explain this. So he says America was destined to become what the Ayatollah Khomeini referred to as the Great Satan the moment Milton's co-religionists stepped onto the shores of Massachusetts Bay. And he goes on to talk a little bit about Emerson and self-reliance. So these are two very different takes on the American Revolution, which I just think is very interesting. And it's interesting to think about the way that natural law is used to defend the American Revolution, but EMJ doesn't seem to see it as based on natural law at all. But I don't know yet because we haven't talked about it. Hopefully we'll get to that in the class. I want to encourage you, after you listen to this episode, which I'm going to wrap up here pretty quickly, I hope, to go back and listen to episode 20 with Jim Douglas. He tells a story about going to Vatican II, where I think it was his professor, his teacher was Father Fagothey, who wrote this book. Father Augustine Fagothey, he was a Jesuit who wrote this book, Right and Reason, published in 1958. I believe he was Jim's teacher, and they were enemies. And so the name of the podcast is called Love Your Enemies or something. And he's talking about how they were at odds. Jim went to Vatican II. I think Father Fagothey was there as well. And they were sort of like duking out, verbally, of course, intellectually, this battle between them, because Jim Douglas was very like nonviolence, Christian nonviolence. And Father Fagothey, like, not at all. Like, not at all. And I think Jim explains in episode 20 how Father Fagothey basically could justify and tried to justify total war, total nuclear war based on Catholic just war principles. And Jim was like, you can't do that. Like, it doesn't make any sense. So Jim says how he was his enemy in the sense that they both believed separately in different things. He turns it into this beautiful thing about how he thought of that during Vatican II. It's just a very interesting little piece of oral history. But speaking about natural law, there's a whole thing in this book on natural law, and I've sort of been working my way through it. But there is a part on war as well. And I guess this is just to the point that natural law is not so, natural. If natural law was that clear, we would really not need revelation. We would be able to figure everything out because it's written on our heart and it's just common sense. But we do need Jesus. We need revelation because we can't figure that out. Reason is corrupted, so we really can't figure out God's way simply through natural law. And I will say, I think that this whole project that Taylor Marshall is undertaking is a bit outdated at this point. Like, to lump in, just say scripture and God and Trinitarianism as if, these words are so vague, they don't mean anything. And at this point, I think I'm definitely more on the EMJ train in terms of thinking that, like, the separations between Protestantism, Catholicism, and Judaism, like, they really do matter. It's just impossible to kind of lump everyone in together under natural law at this point. So I don't know. I'm going to read his book just to see what he has to say, but that strikes me as like trying to patch up something that has already kind of fallen apart. I want to make another point about natural law in Father Fagothey's book. I want to read some of the things that he wrote. This was published in 1958. It was before Vatican II. It clearly contradicts a lot of the things that are in the Catechism now. But he's obviously a very intelligent philosophical thinker, and he's carrying things through to their logical conclusions. And so this was kind of like, I think Father McCarthy told me too, this was like almost like the Bible when you would go and like to college, like everybody read this book and this was kind of like the final say on everything. So I want to read you, and it's all based on natural law, of course, his conclusions or his understanding of him. St. Thomas on War. St. Augustine, while extolling the excellence of peace, is realistic enough to recognize that war is not always avoidable. He is summarizing a prior passage where actually St. Augustine doesn't say that at all, but that's beside the point. Moving on. Apart from the case in which a nation merely defends itself against an unjust attack, it may even be necessary for a country to prosecute war against another to recover its rights. So he's basically saying in here that you don't have to wait to be attacked. You can go to war. It might be necessary for a country to prosecute a war against another to recover its rights. Now that goes totally contradictory to what is in the Catechism now. And he's writing in 1958. We know that when they went to get permission to prosecute an offensive war in Iraq, Pope Benedict was like, "You get out of here. You Catholics, stop trying to make this just war theory fit your Iraq war." Father Fagothey says war may be defensive or aggressive, and he's basing all of this on, I would say, natural law. an understanding. There seems to be a fairly common opinion among unthinking people that the nation which declares war or makes the first attack is waging aggressive war, while the nation against which war is declared or which is attacked first is waging defensive war. But this view is too superficial and formalistic. Here, Suara is on the subject. This is a quote. It remains for us to explain what constitutes an aggressive war and what, on the other hand, constitutes a defensive war. For sometimes that which is merely an act of defense may present the appearance of an aggressive act. Thus, for example, if enemies seize the house or the property of others, but have themselves suffered invasion from the latter, that is no aggression but defense. Consequently, we have to consider whether the injustice is, practically speaking, simply about to take place, or whether it has already done so, and redress is sought through war. In this case, the war is aggressive. In the former case, war has the character of self-defense, provided that it is waged with the moderation which is blameless. Hence, back to Fagothey here, a nation is fighting a defensive war if its sole purpose is to protect itself against actual or imminent aggression, even if its defense assumes the appearance of an attack. Just as a man need not wait until he has been shot at before defending himself, so a nation need not wait until it is actually invaded before using a means of defense. Moral certitude of the enemy's intention seems sufficient. Even the formality of declaring a war has been discarded by some states. The modern nations must be prepared to meet a sneak attack. The advantage... Okay. So maybe under some of this natural law, just war logic, the American Revolution could be defended. Defense is against a future evil to prevent it from happening, not against a past evil to remedy it. This is a dispute on words. It is simpler and more consonant with modern usage to divide war into offensive and defensive, according to the nation responsible for provoking, not necessarily beginning, the hostilities, and into just and unjust according to the nation having moral right on its side. Aggression can then be reserved for unjust, offensive war. So now to just say an aggressive war is not wrong. He's trying to say there are aggressive wars that can be just. And we would call that offensive, and we would save the word aggressive for the unjust war. So he also says war is not intrinsically wrong. As an individual is allowed to use force and self-defense, and also for the recovery of what is rightly his when recourse to higher authority is impossible, so may the state for the same reasons. War in itself is a physical evil. It becomes a moral evil only when there is injustice on the part of the one using the force. He says, a state which would not wage war under any circumstances, however serious, would condemn itself to extinction. If the natural law demanded this, then God, the author of the natural law, would both will and not will political society. He would will that it achieve its end and at the same time deny to it the means necessary for attaining that end. If a state cannot protect the lives, liberty, and property of its citizens, it is failing in its chief function. If it cannot do this except through force, it must have the right to use force. Here we see what is wrong with pacifism as a theory. If the pacifist merely condemns militarism, the use of aggressive war as an instrument of imperialistic expansion, we shall certainly agree with him. But if he condemns all war, even defensive, he must logically be an anarchist. If he will not allow a government to protect itself, he does not really want any government. The pacifist allows his emotional horror at the evils of war to cloud his thinking. Thus, pacifism can offer no guarantee against war, blah, blah, blah. I could critique that a lot, but we're getting a little bit off track here. There are some weird statements in here about natural law. He writes, who are combatants and who are non-combatants? An accurate determination could be made only by international agreement, but the natural law seems to approve the following general rule. He's like always invoking the natural law to approve all of these ideas, some of which are now completely done away with by the Catechism and Vatican II. He seems to think that the natural law supports everything he's saying here, but we now know, according to the teachings of the Catholic Church, that that this is not right. Which again, I mean, just to prove the point that the natural law is very debatable. And so when people casually reference it, it just drives me nuts. That's the point of this whole episode. It's like, oh, the natural law. It's like, oh yeah, like 18 million people have a different view of that. What of the atom bomb, the hydrogen bomb, and the more recent developments in nuclear weapons? This is the part that Jim Douglas was talking about, I think. Since a nuclear bomb is merely a bigger and more destructive bomb, its use is governed by the same principles that any other military weapon, but there is an additional factor that makes it a difficult moral problem. An ordinary bomb can be aimed at a military target, and any other destruction caused is incidental. But the nuclear bomb spreads instant destruction over so wide a region that it is hard to see how it can be directed against military installations as it is intended as an intended target, so as only incidentally to harm the civilian population. How can the principle of the proper proportion between good intended and the evil permitted be applied in this case? I'll say that again. How can the principle of the proper proportion between the good intended and the evil permitted be applied in this case? These possibly justifying reasons suggest themselves. I like how he talks in the passive voice. These possibly justifying reasons suggest themselves, like as if it's coming from outside of him, like from the muses. Like, the muses have inspired me. Natural law is speaking to me and through me. Number 1, the enemy may have adopted the technique of total war and therefore lost all right to a distinction between military and non-military objectives. In this case, the nuclear bomb could be used anywhere, but prudence would dictate that it be used in localities of greatest military concentration. Hospitals, churches, orphanages, and the like could hardly be avoided, but the raid should be so designed to spare as many of them as possible. So he seems to be saying that in an event of total war, a Christian could also participate in dropping nukes, as long as you tried your best to avoid hospitals, churches, and orphanages. But inevitably you're going to get some in there, and as long as you don't get too many in there, then it's cool. This is totally, absolutely, this is not in line with the current teaching of the church in the catechism at all. They're just like, yeah, you can't drop a weapon that indiscriminately kills people on a large area. Number 2, the military target may be extensive enough for the use of the atom bomb. In the last war, it was alleged, how truly we are not deciding here, that the making of parts for warplanes and munitions was parceled out to all the homes in Japanese cities, thus making every home a manufacturing plant of war material. If this report was true, the entire city would be a legitimate military target. So he's like, yeah, so if they're making war stuff, like munitions and stuff, in the city, then, like, yeah, you can totally drop an atom bomb on the whole thing. Sounds to me a lot like what we hear from Israel right now about what they're doing with the hospitals, bombing the refugee lines where people are waiting in line for food. Like, this is in, like, what Israel is doing, and the justification and the rationale that they're using for what they're doing is following this very Catholic book basically to a T. I mean, I'm sure that you could analyze Israel's actions and support everything they're doing with what Father Fagothey was writing in 1958. The importance of the military target must be considered as well as its extent. A region only partially militarized and predominantly civilian can house an installation of tremendous importance, such as the enemy's atom bomb assembly plant. The enemy cannot claim sanctuary for this by putting it in a civilian sector, and should evacuate the civilian population from such a dangerous spot. So this is the same thing we hear about, well, Hamas is hiding in the hospitals. So if the people in the hospital all die from a bomb, that's Hamas's fault. They shouldn't have been hiding there in the first place. The improbability of getting another shot at the target is another relevant factor. If the objective is extremely important but so deep within the enemy territory that there is slim chance of ever getting another bomb through, it is necessary to make that bomber's load as effective as possible. The nuclear bomb is the most effective yet, and in the circumstances, its use might be justified despite a greater destruction of civilian lives. He's like all out justifying, based on natural law and self-defense, dropping of nukes on cities. As bombs are legitimate weapons if used properly, so also is chemical warfare. It must be used strictly against the military, and any harm that comes to civilians must be unintentional and unavoidable. He does draw a line, however, at bacteriological warfare, which offers a more difficult problem because it seems impossible to control it. Let's talk about enemy property. As far as the natural law is concerned, the nation fighting a just war may commandeer all the enemy property, public or private, it needs to prosecute the war. And if we add here the punitive aspect of war, it can confiscate all public property and even permanently annex the territory of the guilty nation. Okay, and he said that's basically what Israel's doing, right? They're getting rid of everything, they're ruining everything, they're ruining all the property, so the Palestinians will not have anywhere to go home to. And they are basically on the path to permanently annexing the territory. Father Fagothey, in Right and Reason, says that's cool. That is cool. And how does he know? Because he says, as far as the natural law is concerned, all this is fine. But this matter is regulated by custom and international agreement, and the signatories to such pacts are obliged to keep them. The customary rules are that property of military value may be seized or destroyed, but property of no military value must be respected, unless you had to, bomb the hospital, drop a nuke on the hospital. Private property may be commandeered, but at the end of the war, it must be returned to the owner or compensation made for its consumption. The invading power will exercise temporary administration over the public property of the occupied state until its final disposal is determined at the peace treaty. Interesting. War is one of the most regrettable things that have come to deface our fair world. Unlike natural disasters, war is a wholly man-made affair, the result of man's greed, envy, hate, ambition, blindness, and passion. Something utterly useless and unnecessary. I thought he already told us it was necessary. But if we must live with the breed of men we find in this world, and if they make war on us, well, we must defend ourselves. War is the result of greed, envy, hate, ambition, blindness, and passion. It's utterly useless and utterly unnecessary, but we sure can participate in it if we have to defend ourselves, right? Otherwise, the good must live as slaves of the wicked, who will then be free for every kind of violence and tyranny. In such a world, there would be no peace. War is therefore an evil, but sometimes an unavoidable one. In a just war, surely this is what the founders of the country and the people who rebelled against England would. This is common sense, right? This is common sense. Is it satanic logic? Is it common sense? Is it natural law? What is it? In a just war, it is the duty of every citizen to support his country at the expense of fortune, liberty, and even of life itself if necessary, and his country has the right to call on him for such support. In a just war, it is the duty of every citizen to support his country at the expense of even his life. It's your duty to fight for your country if it's a just war. This is very outdated thinking, and when people knock Vatican II, I'm like, thank God for Vatican II, because we changed a lot of this stuff insofar as war goes. It didn't go far enough, and it's still a mess. But at least we give people the right for conscientious objection not to participate in war, even if somebody somewhere declares it just. But really, if you're going to tell Catholics that they have to fight in a just war, you should tell the bishops that they have to make a declaration when the country goes to war and put their butts on the line and say, it's just or it's unjust. It's just, you have to go fight, or it's unjust. Make that decision, put that decision on the bishops. Because who gets to say it's a just war? Donald Trump? He didn't even put his hand on the Bible when he did the thing. So anyway, this is all a mess. This natural law thing is a much bigger issue. This is just my little rant. Anyway, maybe we'll get around to exploring some of these issues in the class, or maybe E. Michael Jones will watch this and go, Ellen, you missed my point completely. Let me come on the podcast and clear things up, in which case he would be welcome at any time. Taylor Marshall, you as well are welcome on my podcast. Bring Trump. Bring Trump. And let's have a conversation because I need to ask him about that swearing in. All right. I hope you got something out of this. Let me know what you think in the comments. Was this very disjointed and didn't make any sense, or did I pull it together in the end? You can let me know. All right. Have a great week.